A woman accused of shooting her sleeping boyfriend, then hacking up his body with a machete.
We first broke this story back in August when part of the body was found in a landfill. Now tonight, we're learning new details on how police were able to crack that case.
Stephen Coleman's mother crossed state lines to search for her missing son. The woman sitting beside her already knew he was dead. Cierra Sutton rode with Stephen's family through Baytown. She went to the police station. She helped distribute flyers. She called Stephen's phone and acted as though she was waiting for him to answer. But Stephen was never coming home. According to the case against her, he had not walked away from their apartment. He had died inside it while Cierra's young daughter was elsewhere in the same one-bedroom home. 2 days later, Cierra reported him missing. She told police Stephen had left around 10:30 that night to search for his daughter and never returned. Yet both his vehicles were still outside. He had missed work. His family had heard nothing from him. Even his daughter had received no call. And Cierra remained beside the people searching for answers. What Stephen's mother did not know was that her son had already left behind a warning. He had reportedly told a female friend more than once that if he disappeared, or if anything happened to him, police should look at Cierra. Why would Stephen say that about the woman living in his home? What had happened inside their relationship that made him believe he might not survive it? And how did Cierra expect to explain the blood that remained after furniture began disappearing from the apartment? The answer would involve Stephen's bank card, Cierra's Jeep, people she spoke to after leaving Texas, and a landfill worker who found something just days before Hurricane Harvey struck. This is the story of Stephen Slim Dodon Coleman, a father, a worker, and an aspiring rapper whose family searched for him beside the very woman later convicted of killing him. Tell us the city or country you are watching from, and subscribe to Dark Trace Crime Stories. Because Stephen's disappearance did not begin when Cierra entered the police station. It began inside the home he had allowed her to share. Before his name became tied to a murder investigation, Stephen Coleman was known by those closest to him as a son, a brother, a father, and a man trying to build something of his own. Stephen was 32 years old. His family roots were in New Orleans, but by 2017, he was living in the Baytown area of Texas. His mother, Coleman, later said he worked for Exxon and traveled for his job. That detail comes from her account, but it helps explain why missing work was so unlike him. Outside employment, Stephen was serious about music. He performed under the name Slim Dodon and posted his work. Friends described him as talented, original, and difficult to forget. To them, he was working, creating music, and trying to move forward. Dominique Clark remembered Stephen as someone whose personality and presence immediately stood out. Michael Gonzalez described him as a good man who appeared to be moving in a positive direction. These were not people trying to create a perfect image after his death. They were friends explaining why the version of Stephen later presented in some programs did not match the man they knew. But the most important part of Stephen's life was his daughter. She lived in Houston with her mother, and relatives said she was deeply attached to him. Stephen also remained close to his mother and brothers, who spoke with him often and knew his routines. That is why the silence felt wrong immediately. Stephen did not call his daughter. He did not contact his family. He did not report to work. His vehicles remained parked outside his apartment. Stephen had built a life in Baytown. Then he opened that life, and according to his mother, his apartment, to Cierra Sutton. Cierra Alexis Sutton was about 30 years old in 2017. She worked at a veterinary clinic, had a young daughter from a previous relationship, and had no known prior criminal record. To people outside the relationship, there was no official record suggesting that Stephen Coleman was living with someone capable of killing him. Baytown police had no documented history of domestic violence calls involving the couple, and neighbors did not describe an apartment that repeatedly drew police attention. Reports referred to the one-bedroom unit at Briarwood Village Apartments as the home Stephen and Cierra shared. Stephen's mother, Coleman, later gave a more specific account. She said Stephen had secured the apartment himself and was proud of having a place of his own. According to Cierra moved in after explaining that she was having family problems and nowhere else to stay. Stephen allowed her into the home he had established. Cierra's daughter also lived there, creating the appearance of an ordinary household. Two adults sharing a small apartment while caring for a child. From the outside, there was no clear sign that the situation inside had reached a dangerous point. One neighbor, Donald Wooten, remembered ordinary conversations and seeing the couple smile. Nothing about those brief encounters warned him that Stephen believed the woman sharing his home might one day be responsible if he disappeared. No protective order had been filed. No previous assault between them had been formally documented. There was no public record showing that officers had repeatedly been called to separate them. But an absence of police reports did not mean the relationship was free from conflict. Friends were hearing a different version of life inside that apartment. Stephen had reportedly said something that became impossible to ignore once he disappeared. The first serious indication of danger did not come from a police report. It came from Stephen himself. To people around them, Stephen and Cierra's relationship did not appear straightforward. One of Stephen's friends later described it as a love-hate relationship. Another believed Stephen wanted to leave. That claim provides possible context, but it was never established in court as the reason Cierra killed him. Police did not confirm jealousy, a breakup, or another romantic partner as the motive. What Stephen reportedly said before his death was far more important. According to information later included in probable cause reporting, Stephen spoke to a female friend more than once about what should happen if he suddenly disappeared. He told her to look at Cierra, not a stranger, not someone from his past, the woman sharing his apartment. That warning did not emerge after the murder, when suspicion had already formed. Stephen reportedly made it before he vanished, and the fact that he repeated it suggests that it was not simply a careless statement made during one heated disagreement. He appeared to believe that something could happen to him. Yet public records do not explain what Cierra had done to create that fear. No publicly released message revealed exactly what Stephen had experienced inside the relationship. That missing context makes his warning even more disturbing. Stephen knew enough to identify the person police should question, but those around him did not know enough to understand how serious the situation may have become. His friend believed he wanted to leave, but Stephen never got the opportunity to explain whether that decision was connected to his warning. What remains certain is this: before anyone found blood, before Cierra reported him missing, and before a landfill worker made a devastating discovery, Stephen had already directed attention toward the woman living inside his home. On August 16, 2017, that warning stopped sounding hypothetical. Wednesday, August 16, 2017, began without any public sign that Stephen Coleman was about to disappear. At some point that day, a friend spoke with him and expected him to come over. Stephen never arrived. There was no final message explaining why. No call saying his plans had changed. The visit simply never happened. Back at the one-bedroom apartment on James Bowie Drive, Stephen and Cierra argued. Stephen eventually went to bed, and while he slept, the danger he had warned his friend about came directly to him. According to the prosecution's case, supported by statements Cierra later made to people she knew, she obtained a gun and shot Stephen in the head while he was asleep. He was not standing across the room threatening her. He was not running toward the door. He was in bed, unconscious and unable to defend himself. Cierra's young daughter was also inside the apartment that night, reportedly in another area of the home. She was close enough to be inside the residence when Stephen's life ended. Nothing in the available record suggests Stephen ever walked out of that apartment alive. The story Cierra would later give police, that he left around 10:30 that night to look for his daughter, would eventually collapse under the evidence. But on that first night, no one outside the apartment knew what had happened. His family did not know. His employer did not know. His daughter did not know. The friend waiting for him did not know why he had failed to appear. By morning, Stephen was dead, and Cierra was still inside the home where it happened. Before she could present his absence as a mystery, however, she faced an immediate problem. Stephen's body remained inside an apartment connected directly to both of them. After Stephen was killed, the apartment itself became the first problem Cierra had to solve. According to witness accounts later summarized in probable cause reports, Cierra said Stephen was too heavy for her to move in one piece. She then used a machete to dismember his body inside the apartment. The remains were wrapped in sheets or similar material, secured with duct tape, and carried out in portions. Investigators believed Cierra used her Jeep to transport them before placing them in different dumpsters around the area. From there, ordinary waste collection did the rest. The dumpsters were emptied on schedule, and their contents were carried into the regional disposal system. Stephen's remains were no longer inside the apartment where he had been killed. They had been mixed with commercial rubbish and taken toward a landfill serving Baytown and nearby communities. The next day, August 17th, Stephen's card was used at a Walmart in Harris County. Store video reportedly showed a woman resembling Cierra purchasing duct tape and a memory foam mattress topper, or a similar bedding item. That transaction was especially damaging because Stephen was already dead. His own money had reportedly been used to buy items investigators later associated with efforts to hide what had happened to him. Those purchases would later matter because they lined up with what police found after entering the apartment. Blood was reportedly discovered near the bed and in other parts of the bedroom. More blood was found in the bathroom, the kitchen, and inside Cierra's Jeep. By then, much of the furniture had already been removed, but the apartment still carried evidence that Stephen had never simply walked away. Witnesses also reported seeing Cierra with unidentified men removing furniture and belongings from the unit around August 20th. Some neighbors said items were being moved late at night, and there were also reports that some of Stephen's property may have been offered for sale. That raised an obvious question. Did anyone help her? Stephen's mother has long believed Cierra could not have completed every stage alone. Police acknowledged that other people may have been near the apartment during the relevant period. But no one else was publicly charged, and the available record does not establish that the men moving furniture knew a murder had taken place. Their identities, their knowledge, and their reason for helping clear the apartment were never publicly resolved. By then, Stephen's body had been removed, the apartment had been altered, and some of his belongings were gone. But clearing the scene was only part of the concealment. Cierra still needed to explain why Stephen had suddenly vanished. At approximately 6:30 p.m. on August 18th, 2 days after Stephen was last known to be alive, Cierra Sutton reported him missing. She told Baytown police that Stephen had left their apartment around 10:30 p.m. on August 16th to look for his daughter and had never returned. But almost immediately, parts of that story did not make sense. Both of Stephen's vehicles were still parked at the apartment complex. He had not called his daughter. He had not contacted the child's mother. His own mother, brothers, friends, and co-workers had heard nothing from him. His phone went unanswered. His Facebook activity stopped. He failed to report for work. This was not a man who had simply decided to disappear for a few days. Stephen stayed in contact with the people closest to him, especially his family and daughter. The complete silence frightened them because it was completely outside his normal behavior. When Coleman realized her son was not responding, she traveled from Louisiana to Baytown with Stephen's brothers. They searched streets and alleys. They created and distributed missing person flyers. They contacted media outlets and tried to involve search services that could help locate him. Corla later said the family also tried to contact the FBI and a search organization, but outside assistance required coordination with local police. She recalled being told that detectives were unavailable until Monday. That was Corla's account rather than a finding made by a court, but to Stephen's family, every delay felt like time they could not afford to lose. And during parts of that search, Cierra stayed close. According to Corla, Cierra rode with the family, accompanied them to the police station, and behaved like another person desperate for answers. She called Stephen's phone as though she expected him to pick up. At one point, Cierra reportedly spoke about the earlier murder of her own brother. She compared Corla's determination to find Stephen with what she wished her own mother had done when her brother was killed. Corla was listening to those words while searching for her son. Prosecutors would later establish that Stephen had already been killed inside the apartment he shared with Cierra. That is what makes her presence beside his family so difficult to understand. She watched a mother call her son's name. She watched his brothers search for him. She stood near the people who still believed Stephen might be found alive, while the case against her showed that she already knew why he would never answer them. Had you been searching beside Cierra, what detail would have made you question her story first? The abandoned vehicles, Stephen's complete silence, or the claim that he had left on foot to find his daughter? Cierra appeared to be waiting for the investigation to lose momentum. Then a landfill worker found something she had not expected anyone to recover.
Friends say the innocent girlfriend act went away after the torso was discovered when she left town. This is where it happened, this Baytown apartment complex. It was right inside there where Stephen Coleman was killed, shot in the head, and body so heavy that he was chopped into pieces and thrown in the dumpster. A gruesome situation, leaving his friends and family speechless.
I mean, that's some pictures look bad.
Dominique Clark can't help but laugh as he looks through old photos on his phone.
Man, that dude skinny.
The man being Stephen Coleman, a lifelong friend who moved from Louisiana to Houston with him.
You know, I looked up to him and admired him in so many ways, and it was just like, yeah. You know, he was older than me, so I got to call him my big brother.
The good times ended a month ago when Coleman went missing. Days later, a torso was found at a Chambers County landfill. A body part police believe is Coleman's.
Inside, man, I'm broken into a million pieces.
With human remains now under examination, investigators needed Cierra Sutton to answer more questions. A follow-up interview was arranged. Cierra agreed to attend. She never arrived. After missing the appointment, she stopped returning calls from investigators. That decision drew even more attention to the apartment she had claimed Stevens simply walked away from. On August 24th, police obtained a warrant and entered the unit at Briarwood Village. Much of the furniture was gone. The blood was not. The apartment had been cleared until it barely resembled the home Stephen and Cierra had recently shared, but removing beds, chairs, and belongings had not removed what happened there. Investigators reportedly found blood near the bed and elsewhere in the bedroom. More blood was discovered in the bathroom. Additional evidence was found in the kitchen. And when police examined Cierra's Jeep, blood was reportedly detected inside the vehicle as well. Each location told part of the same story. The bedroom pointed to where the attack had taken place. The other rooms suggested that Stephen's body or blood-covered items had been moved through the apartment. The Jeep connected the home to whatever had been transported away from it. Then there was Stephen's bank card. It had been used after investigators believed he was already dead. Store video reportedly showed a woman resembling Cierra using the card at Walmart to purchase duct tape and a memory foam mattress topper or similar bedding item. Those purchases matched details investigators were hearing about how Stephen's remains had been wrapped and how the apartment had been altered afterward. By this stage, police were no longer dealing with a man who might have chosen to leave without telling anyone. They had part of his body from a landfill. They had blood in the apartment. They had blood in Cierra's Jeep. They had purchases made with Stephen's card after his death. They had witnesses who had seen furniture being removed. And they had the woman who reported him missing refusing to return for another interview. But when investigators tried to locate Cierra, she was no longer in Baytown. She had left Texas with her daughter and traveled to Louisiana. Leaving the state removed her from the apartment, but it did not separate her from what had happened there. According to the people she spoke to after arriving in Louisiana, Cierra began revealing details that only someone closely connected to Stephen's death would have known. Leaving Texas did not end Cierra Sutton's connection to Stephen's death. According to investigators, she began speaking about what had happened to more than one person. The first reported admission came from her best friend. That witness told police Cierra called the morning after Stephen was killed and said she had shot him following an argument. Later, after reaching Louisiana, another account came from her brother's girlfriend. The people who heard these disclosures reportedly described the same disturbing sequence. Stephen had been shot while he slept, his body had been cut apart, and Cierra said she could not move him in one piece because he was too heavy. Those statements became crucial because they included details that matched what police had already found inside the apartment and Cierra's Jeep. Still, there is an important distinction. Cierra did not sit down with investigators and give them a complete formal confession to Stephen's murder. The strongest admissions came through witnesses who said she had spoken to them privately. When police later questioned her, they said she provided information that placed her inside the apartment during the relevant period. But she stopped short of admitting the entire crime directly to them. Lieutenant Steve Doris later described Cierra's demeanor during the investigation as uncaring and without visible remorse. That was the officer's personal observation, not a medical or psychological conclusion. Still, it stood in sharp contrast to the frightened girlfriend she had appeared to be while Stephen's family searched for him. By then, investigators had already received information about where she might be staying. That tip led authorities to Metairie, Louisiana, just outside New Orleans. On September 14, 2017, officers located Cierra as she was leaving an apartment and approaching a vehicle. She was arrested without incident. Her young daughter was found alive and safe at a friend's residence. Cierra was taken into custody in Louisiana, where she initially remained while arrangements were made to return her to Texas. She later waived her right to challenge extradition. That meant she would not fight being transported back to Harris County. Soon afterward, she was returned to Texas to face a murder charge in Stephen Coleman's death. But prosecutors were not relying on one witness, one statement, or one discovery. The case against Cierra stretched from the apartment to the Walmart purchase, from the Jeep to the landfill, and from Baytown to the people she spoke to in Louisiana. Nearly every stage of the concealment had left behind a different form of evidence against Cierra and the questions that remained. By the time Cierra Sutton was returned to Texas, the case against her no longer rested on suspicion alone. Stephen had warned a friend that if he disappeared, police should look at Cierra. Then he vanished from the apartment they shared. Cierra told officers he had left on foot around 10:30 p.m. to search for his daughter. But both of his vehicles remained at the complex. He did not contact his daughter, her mother, his own relatives, his friends, or his workplace. He stopped using Facebook and missed work without explanation. Then there were the witness statements. More than one person told police that Cierra had spoken about Stephen's death. Their accounts included the argument, the shooting, the cutting of his body, and her claim that she could not move him intact. A portion of Stephen's body was recovered from a landfill connected to waste collected in the Baytown area. Cierra also failed to attend a follow-up police interview, stopped responding to investigators, and left Texas with her daughter. Taken together, the evidence formed a clear chain from Stephen's final night to the apartment, the Jeep, the Walmart purchase, the dumpsters, the landfill, and Cierra's reported admissions. But several questions remained unanswered. Police never publicly established the exact motive. The public also never learned what made Stephen fear Cierra strongly enough to warn someone in advance. Witnesses saw unidentified men helping remove furniture, but no one else was charged. Their identities, what they knew, and whether they understood they were helping clear a crime scene were never established. It was also never made clear what Cierra's daughter heard or saw inside the apartment. And because only part of Stephen's body was recovered, his family was left without all of his remains. Those questions did not disappear. But prosecutors believed the evidence answered the most important one: who killed Stephen Coleman? In February 2019, Cierra Alexis Sutton was convicted of murdering Stephen Coleman. The court sentenced her to 45 years in the Texas prison system. For Stephen's family, the number carried a painful contradiction. Cierra would lose decades of freedom, but Stephen had lost everything. His daughter would grow up without him. His mother would continue visiting a grave that did not contain all his remains. His brothers would carry questions the trial could not answer. Contemporary reporting stated that Cierra would be required to serve approximately half of the sentence, about 22.5 years, before becoming eligible for parole consideration. Eligibility does not mean release. It means that, after serving the required portion, she may be considered by parole authorities. They may approve or deny release based on the law, her record in custody, the circumstances of the offense, and other factors. The available records reviewed for this case do not show that Cierra's conviction has been overturned, her sentence reduced, or parole granted. Stephen's mother, Coleman, believed 45 years did not fully reflect everything done to her son after his death. She also questioned why no additional charges were pursued over the treatment of his remains and the presence of Cierra's young daughter inside the apartment during the relevant period. Those were the family's concerns. They do not establish that prosecutors were legally required to bring separate charges, but they explain why the sentence did not feel like complete justice to those who loved Stephen. The court had answered the question of criminal responsibility and imposed a punishment. But a prison sentence could not return Stephen's missing remains, restore his daughter's childhood, or end his family's grief. The criminal case concluded with 45 years. The Coleman family's fight did not.
The feeling gets worse for Clark. Coleman's girlfriend, Cierra Sutton, is behind bars facing a murder charge. A person who helped look for him after he went missing.
She played the role of an innocent person. She played that role of an innocent person. She played it to the fullest.
Investigators say not only did she know what happened to Coleman, but she used a machete to chop him into pieces before putting him in the trash.
Devil sent, you know. That's the mind of a bad spirit. You know, that's not a normal mind. That's not a mind of God. That's not one of God's children.
Sutton was arrested last week in Louisiana. Police here are going to give an update in the coming days. While Clark waits for justice, he's thinking about the past.
I spent a lot of time up there, from the before he even got the key. You know what I'm saying? I watched him get the key and watched him sign the paper for it. And it was a big joy to him because it was like he accomplished something.
Only the beginning, Clark says, of so many goals Coleman was set to reach.
I thank God every day for even giving me the opportunity to experience a person like that. because I know I will never meet a person like that ever again.
Cierra Sutton's conviction settled the criminal case, but it did not end the Coleman family's struggle. In November 2022, Stephen's mother, brothers, attorney, and community supporters gathered publicly to challenge the way certain television programs had told his story. Their complaint was not that the murder should be hidden. It was that Stephen had been turned into a character his own family did not recognize. They said some productions portrayed him as unemployed, involved in crime, or defined by troubled relationships with women. His mother disputed those claims and said Stephen worked, traveled for his job, remained close to his family, and was actively pursuing music. The family also objected to how his relationships were presented. They said programs confused details about his daughter, Cierra's daughter, and the people who were actually part of Stephen's life. For them, those errors were not minor. The family made those objections publicly at Houston's Shape Community Center, supported by community activist Derek Muhammad and attorney Sadia Evangelista Karim. Stephen had a child who would eventually be old enough to search for her father's name online. His relatives feared she could unexpectedly encounter graphic reenactments of his death alongside claims about him that they believed were false. They were not only grieving the way Stephen died, they were also trying to protect the memory of the man he had been before August 2017. In 2023, members of the Coleman family filed a federal civil action against TV1 and other media defendants. The lawsuit challenged the way Stephen had been portrayed and the effect those programs had on his relatives. A federal judge dismissed the action without prejudice because the family had not established federal subject matter jurisdiction. That distinction matters. The court did not rule that every statement made by the television programs was accurate. It did not decide that the family's complaints lacked merit. The case ended on a procedural issue concerning whether the federal court had authority to hear it in the form presented. For the Coleman family, the dismissal did not erase the damage they believed had already been done. Long after Cierra received her sentence, Stephen's relatives were still fighting to make sure the crime did not become the only thing the public remembered about him.
It has been 5 years since Stephen Coleman was shot and killed in Chambers County. His family says after 2 documentaries and now a planned third, their wounds from this horrific murder can never fully heal.
Coleman says while those productions have profiled her son's case, no one contacted her or her family about anything. That, on top of what she says are untruths in each production, leave her mourning her son's loss, just as if it just happened, without room for closure.
Coleman's emotional injuries.
He was rebuilding his future in the wake of tragedy.
Insulted ever more the day she says she saw a documentary about her son's death on TV.
They tried to really paint my son as a horrible person.
Stephen Coleman was her son. This dumpster, one of several in which authorities found parts of his body.
Reenacting with a machete and a knife. Blood everywhere.
Several documentaries, says the Coleman family, each with errors.
And then there was another one. That one was called Storm of Betrayal. The next one is Raining Blood.
Where does it stop?
Community activist brother Derek Muhammad says there's another doc about Coleman in the works.
I hear screaming coming from your apartment.
Their concern follows similar criticism surrounding the popular Netflix series on serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer.
And this whole subgenre of true crime, they call it true crime, has become a multi-billion-dollar business.
A business, Stephen Coleman family cries, is built on pain.
5 years in August. I don't miss a day, a month, go and bring flowers. I had to bury what they found.
Stephen Coleman's story should not end with the place where part of his body was found. He was a father whose daughter loved him, a son who stayed close to his mother, a brother, uncle, godfather, worker, and aspiring musician who believed Texas gave him room to build a better future. His family remembered the man behind the stage named Slim DeDon, someone who worked, created music, kept in touch, and remained present in the lives of those who mattered to him. His mother, Coleman, continued visiting his grave and bringing flowers. But each visit carried a pain few parents could explain. She had been forced to bury only what authorities recovered, knowing that other parts of her son were never returned to the family. The sentence was punishment, but punishment was not restoration. It could not complete Stephen's burial. It could not return him to his daughter. And it could not erase the memory of Cierra sitting beside his mother while pretending to help bring him home. Cierra Sutton received 45 years for Stephen's murder. Considering the killing, the treatment of his remains, the false missing person report, and the pain his family still carries, do you believe that sentence reflected the full gravity of this case? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. Please share Stephen's story, subscribe to Dark Trace Crime Stories, and help us remember him for more than the way his life ended. Because Stephen Coleman was not just a victim. He was a father, a son, and a man his family refuses to let the world forget.